All right. Well, thank you everyone who has joined this session, how to evaluate if you should move from GP to a cloud-based ERP. This session, will be recorded, and just so everyone knows, everyone is muted, just like all the rest of the sessions. If you need anything, please submit a request or issue in the chat or Q&A. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian and get started.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And hello, everyone, for the last breakout session, I guess, of the event. Most of you have probably seen the slide already. If you were on the Q&A this morning, you heard me a little bit. So we won't spend a lot of time on that. But before we actually start, we're going to hear from our sponsor, Avid Exchange, and see what they have for us.
Accounts payable and finance are the unsung heroes, keeping business moving, ensuring relationships with suppliers are strong, and that organizations are ready for growth. Yet 30% of an accounts payable professional's day is spent on routine tasks like opening invoices, chasing approvals, stuffing envelopes, searching for files, and entering data. These manual, paper-based processes are time-intensive and prone to inaccuracies, adding up to billions in administrative costs. By speeding up approvals, reducing processing costs, and eliminating paper, AP teams can free up time and resources to focus on tasks that help your business grow. That's why we built Avid Exchange, the leading all-in-one accounts payable, automation, tracking, and payment solution. Avid Exchange eliminates manually handling invoices. Invoices now arrive electronically. Data is extracted accurately. Invoices can be matched to POs automatically and then sent to the right approver so that payment happens on time and reporting is kept up to the minute, all while improving visibility and control over the entire AP process. Avid Exchange works with leading accounting systems and can be implemented in just 45 days. Avid Exchange is backed by a network of more than 500,000 suppliers for the middle market, offering multiple payment options and cash back. And it's trusted by thousands of businesses just like yours to manage millions of invoices and payments each year. Join Avid Exchange in building the future of accounts payable.
All right, if you haven't seen the Avid, it's actually pretty cool. So I wish they worked with personal accounts like me instead of just businesses, but they don't. Okay, so this session, a little bit off the beaten path, if you will. We're going to talk about cloud accounting. There's a lot of talk out there about being in the cloud, some of it hype, some of it real. There's a lot of talk specifically about Dynamics GP and the longevity of the software. And so we're going to address that and talk specifically about that before we end here in a little bit. But talking around GP, GP is an on-prem solution. It was built that way. There wasn't cloud software 30 years ago in 1981 when Dynamics GP was released. It was a Macintosh product back then and didn't become a DOS product for several more years. And so, cloud meant something different, meant something in the sky back then. And so, GP, I'm sure all of you, you're using an on-prem solution. You might say, oh, no, I've got it hosted at Ingevity or Azure, AWS, and whatever, Bob's data center. Oh, that's true, you might, but that's not a software as a service solution. It's not a SaaS solution. It is an on-prem solution. CRM was that way when Microsoft released Dynamics CRM. Salesforce.com has always been a cloud product, but the Dynamics CRM solution grew up as an on-premises solution. CRM, though, as you might know if you've used it or looked at it, CRM is pretty much a cloud-based solution today that is just turned on from Microsoft. Now, CRM does have the ability to be pulled down and installed locally, so if you have to have that on your own servers, then CRM does work that way still today. It's a little more expensive to do that. There's a penalty cost, if you will, to installing it locally. But GP is an on-premises solution, and that's just the way it was built. I mentioned a minute ago that GP could be hosted, and that's true. You can be hosting it, and most of you probably are, and so you have it hosted on your own servers. You could actually host Dynamics GP with Microsoft, and so we have probably in the last 5 years new customers that have purchased Dynamics GP. Many of those don't want to actually get into the server business and have to go out and acquire a server and SQL licenses and antivirus and power conditioning and so forth, battery backups and all that stuff, and backups. So many times people in the last 5 or so years will buy GP, but then they kind of give it right back to Microsoft to host. And GP is able to be hosted without any problem whatsoever with licensing. It's not true software as a service. That goes without saying. And you don't have to host Dynamics GP with Microsoft. You can host that with Amazon. Those are kind of the two big hosting centers. We have GP clients that are hosted with AT&T, private data centers all over the country. Nagivity does private hosting. Rose ASP was another longtime GP hosting center. They were acquired by CyberLink out of Dallas. We've had clients with CyberLink for more than 15 years, probably getting close to 18 years now. And so Microsoft doesn't care where your GP licenses sit. And so if you're thinking of moving to a hosted environment, that is completely acceptable on your license agreement. And you can park the software anywhere you like. There is another model called GP subscription, and that really has nothing to do with the software. That's just a licensing model. And so if you're current on your enhancement and paying your maintenance every year, you wouldn't likely go to subscription. Subscription is a sophisticated name for rent. And so you can rent GP by the month and not pay your enhancement. Most people don't do that because they have a fairly significant original purchase price. And so why would you throw that out and then start paying rent for the same thing you own? So kind of like owning your home and then deciding you're just going to rent it when you've already paid for it. Probably wouldn't do that. But that comes into play if you're on an old version and you're not on enhancement. So maybe you're on GP 10 or 2010. There's still some people out there. Lots of people still on GP 2013, although that's not supported anymore. GP 2015 is not supported. But if you drop your maintenance every year and so you're behind on that, subscription is a way to just change your licensing model and not have to catch up on that back maintenance, which can be fairly expensive, and just kind of relicense the software. It doesn't have anything to do with your data. You don't start over data-wise. It's still the same. Your data is your data, and so you would have to upgrade GP though to get the subscription licensing. You couldn't subscription license GP 2010, for example, so because that's an unsupported version. And so that's again, Microsoft created that model years ago when they thought about making GP a SaaS product, and so that's when they built the web client. And when they went to or offered a subscription licensing model. And so that is out there. You might or read things on that and be confused on what that is. You've heard us talk a little bit about Sage Intacct. That is a to Microsoft. And so Intacct is a software as a service only solution. So Intacct cannot be installed locally. There's one copy of Sage Intacct running in the world, serving up about 15,000 customers, and each customer has their own unique part of Intacct. That's an Oracle-based system, but very powerful, very strong, a good core accounting product, but it is a cloud-only product, much like Salesforce is. And so one question that we hear a lot from our clients and have for the last couple of years is, am I going to be forced to move away from GP? Is GP going away? Is it dying off? The answer to all of those is no. It's not going anywhere. There's no end of life for Dynamics GP whatsoever. You will not be forced to move away from Dynamics GP at all. You can continue to run it the way you're running it for as long as you want to. However, some people do say, you know, maybe it is time to get into the cloud business here as far as my ERP solution. And so they come to us and want to know, you know, what can we do? What should we do? And I would say we're really good at figuring all this out. Some of it does depend on your unique situation. And so it's not a one size fits all. It's not one answer for everybody. But that question does, and if you haven't had it, you probably will at some point. And so there's lots of advertising out there. Of course, Microsoft is advertising all of their cloud products. And so they that's the topic of the day, so to speak, with Microsoft is the cloud ERPs, Business Central, Finance, Operations. And so, you know, they spend a fair amount of money on marketing, and the message does get out to people. But that doesn't mean that there's anything bad or wrong with Dynamics GP. They're not killing it off. They're still developing it. They're still putting new features in every year. And so just keep that in mind. We'll look at the roadmap here. If you haven't seen it, I will show you where the roadmap is before we close out. So let's talk about hosted GP. So suppose you're on GP. It's on your own servers down the hall, which is likely everybody. But maybe you don't really want to go to a true cloud solution where it's software as a service like a Business Central, Sage Intacct piece, but you really don't necessarily want to have GP there in your own office. You know, we have a lot of clients in Texas. Every time there's a hurricane, especially the Houston area, every time there's a hurricane, which, you know, is unpredictable, we have a huge uptick in folks saying, you know what, I really don't want the servers down the hall there, and I've got to go take them out of the office and, you know, drive them towards the center of the country when the hurricane's headed towards the Gulf Coast. So, you know, we see a big uptick in hosting. This pandemic that we're hopefully coming out of soon, we've seen a good amount of people say, you know what, I really don't need the server at the office anymore. We should probably plan on trying to do something a little bit different with the location of my server. And so your GP, as I said a few minutes ago, can be hosted. It's still your software license. You still pay your annual maintenance, your annual enhancement. You still pay that every year. You still control upgrades. You know, if you do those, if we do those, that's all still done the exact same way. It's just you're renting a server someplace so you don't have to buy one. Now, this comes up a lot when people are on an older version and they do have to do a server upgrade to get current. So lots of folks still on 2013. 2013 had different system requirements than 2018. And so specifically the SQL versions were not compatible. And so if you were coming from 2013 up to 2016 or 18, you would have to likely upgrade your SQL Server software. Well, that generally means a SQL Server hardware upgrade. And so, you know, now you're looking at maybe a $12,000 to $15,000 server, depending on the size of your environment, and a few $1,000s for Microsoft SQL licenses, and somebody's time to put all that stuff together, set all that virus for the new server, a backup system for the new server. And, you know, you start, if you've gone through this, and you probably have, you start getting into some pretty decent sized numbers. So a lot of times people, when they're looking at upgrades like that and they have to actually upgrade the infrastructure, the hardware, or the SQL licensing, a lot of times they'll say, yeah, maybe I should just take this and put it someplace else. And so you end up renting a server somewhere, and you still generally have to manage that. So somebody still has to make sure that server is being backed up. Somebody has to make sure that the antivirus is being updated and so forth. And so there's still, you know, kind of the rack space, if you will, where you're just renting a server someplace in some data center, and you still have complete and needed control over it. And then other times you might find a managed services data center where they kind of do all of that and just give us access to the server. And so there's all kinds of hybrid solutions out there for that. But But that is a viable option to just move GP into a data center, and it's not true cloud, if you will, but it gets the servers out of your office and allows you to not have to worry about keeping the power on. And if there's a natural disaster of some sort, then hopefully you don't have to pay any attention to it because your server is going to stay up and running. And I know in Texas, I lived in Houston 13 years and had to evacuate twice for hurricanes, and they've had even more since I've lived there. But that's as a business owner or CFO, controller, that's something you really don't need to be worried about if you're trying to get your family out of harm's way and wonder about, oh, what's going to happen to my data, if my server gets flooded and so forth. So keep that in mind. You probably have all heard that or even talked to some of our folks about that, your account managers or consultants in the past. But hosting GP is a pretty easy way to move that out of your own office. And of course, a lot of people do like the idea of hosting with Microsoft or Amazon just because they are the two major players and are pretty reliable names in hosting. You kind of know they're going to keep the power on for you and keep the lights going and the internet access in and out of the data center. And so that's where we end up typically parking most people that decide they just want to move their servers to a hosted environment. But you really kind of expand that and talk about true cloud, so software as a service. I probably could have built 10 slides and talked the rest of the day on the benefits of cloud accounting, but some of the ones that seem to come up over and over again are obviously greater access on any device, because typically you're running software as a service application through a browser. So unlike GP, where you click on an icon and log in and select the company and so forth, and then you're able to work, software as a service is run through a browser. And so because it's run through a browser, it can be accessed on any device. So it doesn't matter if it's a Windows laptop or tablet or a mobile phone or iOS, so your MacBook Pro or Air, your iPhone, your iPad, whatever it might be. The hardware and the operating system on the hardware become pretty agnostic as far as how you actually launch into your system. And so we kind of say, access from anywhere on any device as long as you have an internet connection. Automatic backup. So if you're using a true SaaS solution, you don't have to worry about backing it up. You don't have to worry about any of that back-end stuff. It's just all done for you. Of course, the publisher would upgrade that. There's no service packs. None of that stuff comes into play anymore. The systems are scalable. So typically with software as a service, some of the solutions you can add and reduce users kind of at random. So if you have a big year-end project and you have to hire 2 or 3 people to get through year-end, and you need 2 or 3 more full users in your solution, in some cases you can add those for a month and then drop them, and then you just pay for what you consume. Other solutions you aren't so flexible. You add and pay for the users, and then they're yours at least for the next year until you renew. And so, but you're not stuck with them forever. So in worst case scenario, typically you would own the users for a year. There's less paper produced. I put a question mark on that. In theory, there's less paper produced. I don't know if that's actually true or not. There's still some of us that have been around a while that are kind of married to producing and printing a lot of paper and storing it. The idea is that we probably don't need to be doing that, but it potentially could and should be a benefit of a true cloud accounting solution. Of course, you're not installing anything. It's just provisioned off by the public it's coming from. So you don't have all the upfront installation. If you're going to add a module, for example, midstream, all of you are on a solution today, likely Dynamics GP. And so you might think, well, the installation doesn't really apply to us. Well, it might if you're going to deploy fixed assets. Well, that's potentially a separate install. Well, in a SaaS environment, it's not necessarily. And so, there's a little bit of efficiencies there. There's safer and better control overall in a cloud solution, and this is probably true with a hosted solution as well. If you're in a reputable data center like a Microsoft or an Amazon, AT&T, Google, Joe's data center down at the old remodeled gas station down on the corner, that may not provide the same control and security that what one of the big names will. So, but generally speaking, software as a service, they are protecting those systems with all of the horsepower and the force that they have available to them. And to date, there's not been any major breach of a SaaS ERP product. And so to date, we hope that continues to be that way. It should. But the crooks and the bad people out there are getting smarter. So and then kind of the big thing is there's no annual maintenance. So software as a service, you're just either paying by the month or you pay upfront for a year at a time, but there's no renewal. So it's maintenance part goes away. So those are all typically seen as pretty big benefits to what cloud accounting might offer us. A couple other benefits. For some people, they like the idea of having an operating expense that they can just expense off every month versus capitalizing that and having to depreciate it. You already own product, and so for you folks, you've already gone through that. It's probably not as big a deal for existing customers that might be looking at a cloud solution. But you do outsource the utilities, at least for your servers. You outsource the management of the server in a true SaaS environment, the pain, if you will, of keeping that thing going and all of the service packs and updates that have to happen on the server. If there's Windows updates and service packs on the operating system, someone else is doing that. That's totally out of your realm now. And so that takes away a fair amount of pain. And of course, security and liability, we talked about security a little bit, and the liability of, not having the data. Somebody break into your office and steal your server. They might not be able to do anything with it, but if your server's gone, you're kind of in trouble for a while. And then heaven forbid if you get into the data and have access to payroll information or customer information, if you're have EFT set up in payables or receivables and you have customer or vendor banking information, that's not something that's a good thing to put in other people's hands. And of course, we talked about the upgrades and the elimination of the database licenses, whatever that might be. The picture there on the right, I put on, I suspect none of your server rooms look like that. And so that's kind of what we're competing with when we talk about keeping our servers down the hall in the server room or the server closet versus a real data center that has invested heavily in security and monitoring and so forth. And so not sure who's all on the session today, but I think I'm pretty safe in saying that none of you have a server center that looks anything like that. So that's kind of what we have access to. But of course, there's always risk when we move to the cloud, and this tends to be associated with your age, and that's just an observation over the last 10 years or so that the younger folks kind of coming into the accounting world, they grew up with cloud everything, and so they did schoolwork on their iPhone or their MacBook Air. They're not so tied to this concept of, gee, I need my server down the hall so I can keep an eye on it, which really doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about it when you compare what you have in place versus what some of the large data centers have to offer. And so, so the younger folks, the risk of cloud is really not a concept that a lot of young people in the accounting world seem to think is out there. If you've been in the accounting business for 25 or so years, then we typically think about the risks associated with cloud because we grew up when cloud was new and it wasn't secure and it wasn't what it is today. And so we remember those stories. And so we've kind of lived through that. Even if it didn't affect us personally, we've seen the news articles. And so, but you have to know that cloud today is totally different than what it was when it was even a thing. And so it's not your father's cloud, so to speak. This is a different world. But some of the real risks that we do have to consider are, well, what if my vendor goes away? What if my publisher goes away? So if you're dealing with a small cloud product, and you might have some cloud product that you work with that has nothing to do with your dynamic systems, just something else in your organization that you deal with or work with. What if that cloud vendor goes away? Then what happens? I mean, there's a whole bunch of questions there on, well, how do I get my data if the vendor's gone, and how do I find another vendor right quick? That's not a spot we want to be in typically. And so we don't generally see that in the ERP systems today. And certainly Microsoft is a name that if Microsoft goes away, we got bigger problems. So we got bigger problems than COVID-19. But of course, the big thing that's still the number one thing when it comes to risk is it's all based on that connection, right? So if we lose our connection, then we can't access our systems. And so that's less of a risk. Now, again, if you've been around for a while and you lived through the early days of the internet and access lines with things like ISDN modems, and I don't even want to go back to dial-up because that wasn't really a solution, but ISDN was kind of the first technology, I think, that we could say that was reliable and was the best speed we had at the time. Of course, we wouldn't even dream of going back to that today. But if somebody cuts the fiber line down the street at the corner there, digging in the ground and brings you down, that's typically a problem. However, today, literally today, as we all work remotely, we found that we may not have to be in the office to actually run payables. And if you use something like an Avid Exchange or other electronic payments, and you're not handling paper checks and stuff, then it doesn't matter where you work. You could be doing that at the coffee shop, and so we don't have the huge reliance on the connection as we once did, because a lot of us did not have any broadband connectivity outside of our offices because it was too expensive, and our companies could afford it, but we would never afford it at home. Well, now that's pretty much gone. There's still a large part of the world that's not covered, but in the U.S., with all but a few exceptions, there's generally broadband access wherever we are. And so, but it is a consideration. If we don't have the connection, then we don't have access to our resources in the system. Of course, there's always the security breach. That's an ongoing thing. It's almost not news anymore, unfortunately, where people, we're desensitized to credit card breaches and so forth. And so there's always, in the back of the mind of the CFO or the controller or the finance folks, there's always this little, gee, what if somebody gets to my data? And you have to pick the right place for that data, whether you're moving GP to a hosted environment or you decide to go to a true SaaS solution. You want to stick with, there's only about 3 or 4 names out there that are ones that we would recommend that you do that with. And so sometimes people don't like the idea that they might get an upgrade before they're ready. And so most of the publishers now will allow the end users to have some control over that. Some of them do not, where we say, okay, we're going to give you 90 days notice, but on September 1st, you're getting upgraded to the new version, and you can't say no, thank you. You get it whether you want it or not. Now, the major publishers generally have a little bit more flexibility in that, and you can pick. It's not like you can say, don't ever upgrade me, but you might say, yeah, I'm not really ready in the first round, So I'll take the second round, which is maybe another 60 or 90 days later. And so there's some flexibility there, but at some point, obviously, you will get the updates. And so you could look at that as a benefit that, I want the upgrade as soon as it comes out. But a lot of folks tend to say, that's in the risk category, that maybe I get upgraded before I'm really ready. And depending on the publisher and the product and how good a job they do of training you on new features and explaining what's going to change and how, you can usually manage around that. A big one to me is kind of the ISV options. I put they may be limited. GP, because it's so mature, has thousands of these little third-party ISV plugins, and I would venture to say that each one of you are using a couple of those for either for convenience or out of necessity, and that's no different when you go to a cloud product. Microsoft, Sage Intacct, NetSuite is out there, Acumatica, those names that you see in the news and probably marketing to you every day. None of those companies can build 100% of what everybody out there needs. It's just virtually impossible. I mean, Microsoft is big and as much money as they have, they can't do that. They won't ever do that. It's an impossibility. And so you're always going to have some reliance on an ISV solution. That's just the way life is in the ERP business. And so, if you look at the ISV products that you have today and say, well, how would those map over to a cloud solution? You could find that some of what you're doing in ISV solutions today might be part of the core out-of-the-box product, if you will, in a cloud product. Other times, the ISV might be the same ISV that you're using in GP today, you might find in the cloud. And yet other times, there's not a solution yet. Your ISV hasn't made the jump to a cloud solution, and nobody else has done it yet either. And so, that's kind of a roadblock if that's a major part of your business and you can't replicate that on a cloud software as a service solution. And so that's usually one that people tend to be a little sensitive to for those reasons. System outages, again, if your server needs to be rebooted or gets hung up and you need to walk down the hall and hit the reset button, you've got control over that. In the cloud, you don't. The good news is in the cloud, you generally don't need to. And so, all of the major publishers have very good uptime. Every once in a while, maybe once every few years, you'll hear that, Office 365 was down for whatever period of time, and Microsoft continues to, put things together to not allow that to happen. But sometimes, somebody cuts their fiber line and or all three of them, whatever might be running into one of the main data centers. And so, sometimes those things just happen and none of us have control. But for the most part, cloud solutions are not down. And so I would say, just a blanket statement, I would venture they have better uptime than any of our on-prem solutions just across the board. And then disaster recovery and undefined service level agreements. Obviously, if you use a SaaS solution, you kind of want to know what the service level agreement looks like. Do they guarantee, 5 nines, 99.999 uptime? Are they guaranteeing that? Are they wishful and hoping to hit that, but they only hit 80% uptime? And so, you really kind of want to look into those things and see what should I expect as far as being up as much as what I need it to be. And then disaster recovery, it's always good to know what if they do get hit. There's been, over the last couple of years, some of the larger hosting centers for Dynamics GP have been hit with ransomware, and that's it's a terrible thing. And we always say we probably could never be completely prepared for it, but some are better prepared than others. And so that's not a spot that you want to be in. If someone is hosting your data or you're on a SaaS solution and they go down for 3 or 4 weeks, that's a big problem. So some other kind of minor risks, you don't have access to the database for the most part. So generally in a SaaS solution, you're not going to go write a SQL query and bring stuff out through Enterprise Manager. That's a no-no. So you're not going to get to that database. There sometimes is a question. Apparently, I liked it because I put it in here twice. Number 2, number 5. Who owns the data? So we don't want to miss that one. But who does own the data? So if you decide to move off of the SaaS solution, you kind of have to know before you get into it how to get out of it. So it's easier said than done sometimes. I know companies like NetSuite, they will say, oh yes, we'll give you your data. Well, we've brought people from NetSuite into the Dynamics family or into the Sage Intacct family, and the data is pretty much worthless. So they might give you a text file of all of your data, your GL, your payables, receivables, inventory, whatever might be out there. They just dump it into a file, and it's one big file with commas in between, and it's not usable. And so there's horror stories like that out there from time to time. And so yes, you technically own the data, but if you want it back, are you going to be able to do anything with it? And so that's always a big consideration that turns into a big risk. And then now this whole slide so renting is duplicated. So how did that happen? That was obviously my fault, but you are renting. And so software as a service is just that. It's you pay for your consumption. You don't technically own it. And so you just pay for it forever. Well, you're kind of doing that with Dynamics GP. You paid a big upfront cost, but you're paying annual maintenance. So even though it's not forever, well, it might be, you're paying that every year. And so, you have to kind of look at the cost of both. And sometimes the software service ends up being a very strong, plus in the financial side. And so most of you have already gone through the on-premises model. On the left there, you've already paid your upfront license fee, maybe 20, 30 years ago. You're paying your annual enhancement, but you bear all the IT costs, all the IT risk. Again, if the server goes down, if the backup's not working and you didn't know that and you needed to do a restore. And so you've got a fair amount of risk if you have your own servers in your own server room there. And you're generally sitting around a 12 to 18-month release cycle, depending on the product you're on. Dynamics GP is getting annual updates now in October of every year, so it's a little shorter than what is in the graphic there. And of course, to get those, you have to go through the upgrade process, which is you got to pay for generally if you use our help, or if you're doing it internally. It's still a little bit of a disruption, and you have some downtime probably, and have to get the ISVs all upgraded, and then it's always a good idea to test before you do it in production. And so, you've got a little bit of that, where that stuff kind of goes away with a SaaS product. Is the publisher's taking care of all that, and all of that risk and cost shifts over to the publisher and is kind of built into your monthly or annual fees. Okay, so specifically as it relates to Dynamics GP, there's two kind of main choices: is sticking with a Microsoft product, and the one that GP maps to for the most part is Business Central. Finance and Operations is the enterprise product that really was taken from the AX code base. And so we have had people go from GP to AX or Finance and Operations. That's generally a 7-figure move. And so, that eliminates most people, right? Because nobody wants to, unless they have to or can afford it, nobody would go into $1 million+ migration if there wasn't a need to. Not that, not that there's not room for that, but Business Central is the mid-market product that is compatible, closely compatible to GP. And so Microsoft has built migration tools for you to move from GP to Dynamics 365 Business Central if you decide that's what is the best solution for you. And we would say don't make that decision alone. Let us help you with that. We've done many of these, and we know where the skeletons are, and we know where the benefits are. And so Don't just try to decide that on your own. Please get with your account manager and let them kind of walk you through that. But you know, with Business Central, because it's the mapped product for GP, Microsoft does have pretty deep discounts for customers that are on an enhancement plan in GP to actually move to Business Central. They give you a pretty big discount. It's about 40%, and there's no end to that right now. I'm sure they'll end that at some point, but right now there's just an indefinite discount on Business Central. But it is a new product. It's a brand new implementation. It looks nothing like GP. It functions nothing like GP. It is a brand new, completely different product. And so you got to be retrained. Your data's got to be migrated over. None of your reports and anything that you've customized in GP, of course, none of that stuff ports over. So that all has to be reworked in Business Central. You may not need some of that customization. You may need different customization. Business Central is updated twice a year, April and October, generally the first part of each month, with new features. And so those are the planned and scheduled updates. You can defer. If you're ready the first week of April, you can defer either until October, or I think you can do it in June. They have some about a 60-day period where you can say, no, not round one for me, thank you. But you do have to watch ISV products, because some of the ISVs that you're using in GP, they don't exist in Business Central. Sometimes you don't need them. Sometimes you need others. And so that's something that we really have to be careful of, is mapping that ISV functionality into the Business Central product to make sure that you don't lose something that is critical. Another great option, which we've had a number of people do, is move away from Microsoft, specifically GP, over to Sage Intacct. And again, it's a new product. It's an annual subscription. Business Central, you pay monthly. Sage Intacct, you pay upfront, and that's good for a year, and then you pay again in a year. So kind of like your annual maintenance, you're doing that with Sage Intacct. So same idea there. The cost could be more or it could be less than Business Central. It just depends on what parts of the system you're going to use. And Intacct does quarterly updates. And those go extremely well. They've really got that down rock solid. There's also data migration tools to bring data out of GP into Intacct. It is the product that has the AI CPA. So if you're an accounting type, you'll know what that is. If you're not, you probably don't care, but that's the American Institute of CPAs. They actually have endorsed Sage Intacct as the cloud product that they recommend as an organization. And so, and that's the only endorsement that they've ever given for an accounting software product. Again, you have to kind of watch the ISVs. A lot of the GP ISVs, the major ones, they actually now work with Intacct. So Avid Exchange, who sponsored the session here, they actually work with both. And so SalesPad works with both. And so, you know, a lot of the nice ISVs that we've grown so used to with GP, we have access to with Business Central and with Intacct. And so that helps kind of level that playing field. Intacct is very strong. It's very good in revenue recognition when we need to amortize our revenue over future periods. So like a subscription software company that's collecting the enhancement, or any that has subscription type billing like that, they really shine in that area. They're very popular with nonprofits, financial services, professional services like us, anyone that bills time. They're very strong in, and we do a lot of Intacct in the healthcare area. Now you might say, well, I'm in GP, you know, and GP has fit over the years very nicely in most of those areas as well. Not so much the revenue recognition, but that's okay. It's okay to have overlap. Where Intacct is not as strong as the Microsoft products is in the supply chain area. So inventory, sales order processing, purchase order processing, and that whole supply chain piece, manufacturing, Intacct is not a go-to solution like Business Central would be. And so there's a lot of overlap because Intacct is a very strong financial system. just like GP is, and just like Business Central is. And so if you have any kind of thoughts or ideas about maybe exploring a true cloud product, we can help you with that. If you just want to talk about moving GP to a hosted environment, we can help you with that as well. So to kind of finish up the last part of this, I wanted to run a couple of here. This one doesn't have any sound, so I can talk over it. Amazon data centers, they're not very good about getting inside of their data centers. In fact, I don't know that I've ever seen a video, and I checked as recently as this morning. They're not too good about letting people inside of their data centers, and so that's just their thing. And there's not too much publicly out there about what the inside of their data centers look like. But what you would expect, traditional, very high security. Again, this would exceed what all of us have invested in our own on-premises data centers. I'm sure if we added up all of the money and security we all have, we still wouldn't even come close to what Amazon or Microsoft or Google have. And so you can see, pretty strong there, and so just what you would expect. And so the other one is more the Microsoft data center, and this one does have a little sound, and this is a longer video. I'm just going to play a couple of minutes of it, but the link is in the slide if you want to go watch the rest of it.
Brian, I don't think the sound is coming through in the video.
Really? No sound? Okay.
But if they could view in the slide deck.
Yeah, so, okay, well, it sounds like the audio is not coming through on that one either.
From 1989.
So, all right, well, the links are in there, and you can go view that one if you like, but I'm not sure why that sound didn't come through and the Avid Exchange did. It's all coming from YouTube. But nevertheless, again, you can see these folks have a lot invested in the data centers, and so if you decide to move to one of these, we work a lot with Azure. We're a huge Azure partner. We're a huge Amazon partner, and so we can definitely help you with those. I mentioned the roadmap slide as well, and so this is the public roadmap. It's going to be under installation here and support, and so this is the publicly stated roadmap for Dynamics GP. Most software publishers will never put out more than 3 or 4, even 5 years, because it's almost impossible to project out 5 years in the technology arena on what things are going to look like. And so Microsoft is careful to not lay, a 10-year roadmap out here, because they wouldn't really be able to put anything in there after, the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. And so, but they do publish it now. it's moved into the Microsoft Lifecycle services, and that's where all of the core Microsoft products sit, where anyone can go look at what's coming. And so GP 2018.2 got moved into Lifecycle services last October, and so that was a huge message from Microsoft to us as partners and to you as customers that GP is important because it is now part of the life cycle of all of their products. And so you can go out here and look and see as October 2020, as that release comes out, the 2019 probably will drop off and they'll firm up the next to be announced down here. 2024, that has been officially stated as an October release as well, but they just haven't updated the site, is what I was told a few days ago. And so you can check that out, and at any time, just go look and see if there's any updates to where GP is heading. Lastly, if you do need help, what we can do is help you figure out if moving to a true SaaS solution is the right thing for your business and which one. And because we do have Intacct and Business Central, we don't, we wouldn't have to force you into a product where, if you're talking to someone that only sells one product or one solution, well, guess what they're going to recommend. And so we have the luxury, and you have the goodness of not having us try to steer you one way or the other. But both products are very good. They fit very well in a lot of areas, but then they do branch off into their own individual areas and go their separate ways in some areas. And so we can help you figure that out. If you just want to talk about moving to a hosted environment to keep GP licensed the way you have it, put that into a data center, we can help you evaluate that and which might be the best. We can do price comparisons between Amazon and Microsoft for you, and because we are large partners of both, again, we like people to have options. We all like options when we're buying something, right? So it doesn't have to be one or the other. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, every situation is unique, and we can't just blanketly say, here's what you should do if you want to be in the cloud or have a cloud software as a service solution. We can't just say, you need to go here, you need to go there. We have to look and evaluate and give you the best possible option. And so regardless of what you do, we continue to support you. GP on-prem there's no end of life for that, which you can see, not going anywhere at all. I've heard unofficially Microsoft people say, GP has a 20-year life inside of Microsoft. That's not official, but I've heard people that are in the know actually throw that 20-year line out there. And so, probably going to outlast a lot of us anyway, at least our working careers. And so LBMC is here to support you regardless of what you decide. If you're perfectly happy just staying on-prem and upgrading GP, we are delighted to do that for you. We have the largest GP team we've ever had in the history of our company with the acquisition of the Interdyne Argus folks, and that was intentional. We needed a big GP team, and so we're glad with that. If you decide Business Central is a better fit, if you want to do something with that, we have a great group of BC folks. They all work for us. They're W-2 employees. Same with Sage Intacct. They're all our own people, and we could evaluate moving to Sage Intacct as well at some point. So with that, I think we are about. If there's any questions in the chat, but please don't forget to do your session surveys and get that information to us. If you have questions, you want to expand on any of this or something that wasn't clear, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call anytime. But any questions sitting out there we need to address?
No, Brian, there's no questions. You did a great job covering everything, so there's no questions. But thank you very much, Brian. That was a great presentation.